that's one of the things people have asked me, who ends up doing well at the Zebra? And I was like, I talk about people who take that kind of ownership. We're not a micromanaging culture. We don't want to be a micromanaging culture. We want people who crave the responsibility and the accountability and want to go, grow and learn from it.
There he is.
Hey, man. Good to see you again.
Good to see you. You're the man of the hour, my friend. How do you feel?
I feel great. I'm excited. Get another chance at doing this, and it's fun. We've been so heads down for a while. Sometimes it's fun to step back and chat about some of the things I'm thinking about.
Yeah. So what's been going on since we hung out in Austin?
We've been going through a pretty kind of large scale company transition. We kind of realigned on some of our objectives and have been kind of transitioning the teams in terms of how we work, and going through a lot of that stuff, which we're right in the heart of. Really just kind of focused at saying, like, we went into the pandemic at 160-ish people with certain ways of working, and we grew to almost 400 during that time. And when we got, we had tremendous growth, but now operating and running and executing at a 400-person company versus 160 with a hybrid workforce with, more people that have joined during the pandemic than we had before. Some of the things that worked to get us to where we were aren't necessarily the ways, that'll work getting us forward. And so it's really around creating like the alignment that was a lot easier when you're walking around the office, right? Helping to reinforce that, put in structures so that, that support the things we need to do today versus what we needed to do before, a lot of things like that. So it's good stuff, good problems to have, all about problems of scale and growth.
That's awesome, man. 160 to 400. What's like, everybody likes like the one thing, right? The condensed. By the way, we're recording. We're just going to record this whole thing perfect. And then chop it up. Yeah. But you got right into it though. Like, I'm curious to know, like, what's the biggest thing that stood out to you from the 160 to 400?
Can I give two things?
Yeah,
because there's two. So I'll say that the first thing that stuck out to me is that, there was an article I found recently that talked about this, and I can't recall where it was, is that when you join a team, right, regardless of what leadership is saying, you learn the most about how to work and how the company works from the people around you. And so when you're 160 people and adding a handful of people, there's a lot more people around you that have been at the company for a while, that know how it works, that, can help with things like, we're a very open, very transparent company, right? You can reach out to me, you can walk by my office, reach out to the CEO. We have a Slack channel where you can just ask questions openly, and that's what we want. But that's not the norm in a lot of places, right? There's a lot of places where it's like, I can't go bother the CTO or the CEO, right? Like I can't take their time and like they're on this other level kind of thing. And so people bring their previous experiences, right, in. And when you have a lot of others that have been here, it's like, no, you should absolutely, reinforcing, you should go talk to them, you should bring it up. You kind of build that culture and to keep it going. When you get to where we've added so many people, more than what we had, and throughout pandemic where people have been remote and not in the same place, who do you work with the most? More likely than not, you're working with people who haven't been here that long, who didn't come up with that, right? So you're not getting that positive reinforcement or that direction around preserving the ways we work, right? Which was so critical. And so that's one of the biggest things, is that we've seen far more of people coming in who just operate by nature differently and who don't, necessarily innately understand how they should work with leadership, how we like to work. And that's a learning for us too, which means we need to do more, overt, explicit, education on that, or communication around how we work. So that's probably one of the biggest ones. The second thing I'll say is that there's just a different dynamic in people's I guess to go to, if you've read Five Dysfunctions of a Team, people's first team, right? Whereas at 160 people, you're still where like the entire engineering team is kind of like in it together. That's their first team. That's who they operate with. But when you grow much larger, those people's first teams and who they operate with is the very specific team that's focused on the area of the code base or the business problem we're trying to solve, right? And so it gets smaller. And even within a department, there's less kind of interaction. And so people are, that kind of closes in. And so the natural, like you have to do more to build that communication, that teamwork, that collaboration that, you might expect at a smaller team would just happen naturally. But it doesn't happen naturally there because just by necessities, of the fact that people can't know or talk to everyone.
Do you have someone in communications now that you work with?
We do. We have some people in internal comms here. We've also, one of the biggest things we did is bring in, kind of build an ops department, or an ops team, which has been, key in terms of helping wrangle all of our processes, our communications, gather all of the information that was kind of spread out, kind of, consolidate, standardize on things. And so that's a big work in progress throughout all of this too.
Yeah, that's really cool. I like that. It's like it's kind of creative, right? You don't hear about it like a ton.
Yeah. I guess you hear a lot about, problems with scale or needs to change. And on the technology side, it's all about, okay, well, how do you run technology at scale? How do you support traffic? How do you release it, deploy it, build it, maintain it at scale? And on the people side, it's more around like management and growth. And what I hadn't seen a lot of is the change in the relationship between teams and the change in the relationship between leaders and the teams as you grow.
And so that's something you recently got an experience with.
Yeah. I think every time we've kind of hit a new stage of growth, there's, you get that one little thing where when it's 10 people in a room and I'm working with the developer directly, and then all of a sudden it goes to we're bigger and now there's a layer of management between, right? That there's this sense of loss for the developer and for me, right? Like I need to now figure out as a leader how to stay on top of what's happening without, micromanaging, without staring over someone's shoulder, pegging for status reports. But they also now have the sense of loss where they were working directly with me and now we're getting information kind of filtered down, or, that there's not that direct relationships. And so it happens at every stage. And I think this was our reckoning of it happening at this stage too.
That's pretty cool, man. I like it. And I like to see you grow and the company grow. I think we should give a little background about what the Zebra is, what they do. Absolutely.
Yeah. So thanks. Thanks for having me on the show as well. The Zebra, we are a digital insurance comparison site. We started initially in auto insurance and, have expanded into home, renters, and kind of working through other verticals. But our job is really to be an advisor for consumers, to help consumers understand insurance as a whole, what they need, what goes into pricing it, and then help match those consumers with the right carrier and policy for that. And so that is in a nutshell what we're trying to do. Bring a little bit of, transparency, a little bit of matchmaking, a little bit of education and trust to this industry that, it is something where the whole advent of the insurance agent was because it's a complicated and complex product and it's not something tangible or easy to understand.
Yes. Yeah. And I remember, I had previously a license in Florida to own and operate an insurance agency. And this is like way back in the day. Mm-hmm. And people were hacking together these things called like multi-raters, which would just screen scrape and like go input and physically recreate, because they were all apps on desktops. You know how you would get quotes, and the agents were doing that to try to get multiple quotes quickly. Yeah.
And you described exactly the situation we picked up with in 2013 when we started with, okay, how are we going to get rates? And it was that situation. You had multi-raters that were doing this, that were desktop apps. insurance carriers who hadn't invested in building APIs, the ones that did have APIs were based on standards, which were more like suggestions. They were so old school APIs, not JSON, not modern, REST APIs or anything else, right? And then on top of that, there was this hesitancy to price transparency where, carriers didn't want to be commoditized. They didn't want to be what they called spreadsheeted, and had seen it happen like in the UK, in other parts of Europe, in South America. And, you have carriers who have invested a lot of time and money in building their brands and their differentiation that, saw price transparency as completely opposite to that, right? So that's what you described is actually right where what the state of the tech and industry was when we started.
So is that you guys don't actually write insurance yourself, correct?
Correct.
You compare. It's more like there's like a Policy Genius thing. I don't think they're a competitor. They do it for like life insurance.
The Policy Genius is actually very similar. Like they are, they're a friend of me in the sense that they're in life insurance, but they do a very similar thing to what we do. We just operate in different verticals. But they're also a licensed agent or broker just like us. We're a licensed agent and broker. We both have call centers. We just have started and focused on different lines of insurance.
So is it like an app? Can I download a Zebra app?
No app.
Website?
And it is a website. It's desktop and mobile. And we thought about the app and we looked at it and said, this is something that while we want people to shop when it's the right job, like that, there's not a whole lot of like, I'm going to check this every day, right? Like, how many people you shop for insurance when something happens, right? When something changes in your life, when your policy renews, when prices go up. But that's a periodic thing. It's not a consistent thing that you're going to do daily, weekly. You do it every 6 months, every 12 months, right? Something like that. And so, and looking at it, we're like, at some point, perhaps an app makes sense. Not right now.
Yeah, that's funny because a large part of my career was just building apps, like apps. And for the longest time when I did this, leadership company and it was leadership software, people were asking me, "Oh, wait, are you going to do an app? You going to do an app?" And I'm like, "No, because it's not functional for the end user. Like, the last thing you want to do is make a group of executives go download an app to take leadership training." I was like, it should just come to them, like cracking the lobster, for the customer. It should just arrive right to them in the most easy way with auth links and everything. But yeah, I like it. And then I was also thinking, I was like, well, you could probably like store the insurance cards in there or something, but then that would somewhat blur the line between like who you are and what you're doing, right?
Well, when we talk about like where we want to go as a company, right, our whole goal is to be an advisor for these consumers. And if you think about, if you walked into Joe's, insurance shop on the street, they know about you. They know what drives you, what your family is like, what your needs are, but they also know what policies you have. And so ultimately what we want to do is bring that online to where there is this notion of like a digital wallet or where you can have all your insurance cards and your policies in one spot and see them. And that's when I think a mobile app makes sense, right? Where I can pull it up. And, when we get to the point where, obviously we have to do a good job of educating people that we're not the insurer, right? What we're doing is helping bring it all together. But that's where I think there's value is like one touch, here are all my policies, right? And here's how I do, if I need to make changes or learn something about it, maybe that's not directly through us. Maybe it's contacting the carrier. Maybe it is calling us, right? But all that stuff's right at your fingertips. I was like, that in my mind is where we can have a ton of value.
So where's the state of the industry today? Like, is it like if I wanted to build a competitor, and by the way, we can we can cut out any part of these things that we don't want.
No
this
problem.
is just us talking, and you can be like, we should probably cut that out. But like, I'm just personally curious because I know exactly what you were talking about with the soap stuff, and everybody was so disjointed, and it's almost as if they intentionally like defunded their own API teams so that people wouldn't do this. Where is it at today? Is it accessible, or how do you guys interface with these companies?
It's far more accessible now, and it's because there was enough traction and enough push for price transparency, enough, kind of motion in the industry to where carriers finally realize we have to do this, or we're going to lose out on market share, right? And that's where it started shifting. And so carriers invested in some of the APIs, at least for part of the experience, right? Which is in general for auto and for a lot of these, there's one API call for what's called an estimated quote or rate estimate. Then you get a second one for a bindable quote or policy, and then the third call is for payment and binding the policy, right? And so that's the generalization, but that's kind of what it is. And in general, companies had invested in that first one, the estimate, and sometimes the first and second one, but not as much in the binding and documents and policy. But that's slowly starting to shift. And so we're seeing more and more of that stuff happen. More and more technology companies coming in to help be the kind of plumbing and the middlemen there. And so the technology hurdles are less than they were, almost 9 years ago. But what still remains kind of the biggest, hurdle to someone coming in are the relationships with the carriers, which is, you can integrate the technology all you want, but if you don't have the relationship with the carriers, you haven't proven the value, you haven't proven it, then you can't do anything with the APIs, right? Because you still have to be appointed, you still have to have, budget and the relationships and that proven track record of kind of matching high quality, consumers with those policies, them retaining, et cetera. And so that's probably still the biggest barrier to entry for someone trying to do this is building that set of relationships.
Yeah, it's tough. And I remember going around doing that in real estate. There was 930 different MLSs and you had to go around to all of them to connect them. Yeah.
Yeah.
So when you went from 160 to 400, was most of that customer success or customer service or engineering?
Yeah. I'd say there was a big chunk that was engineering, data, product, and then we definitely added to our sales team and agency. And then, added some to the marketing team and other parts. We built up the ops org, as I mentioned. So, there was some spread out throughout the company, but a big chunk was engineering and data.
That's exciting, man. I want to, was your podcast related to the Zebra engineering team, or is it just something else that you were doing?
The Tesh on Tap that I was doing?
Tesh on Tap, yeah.
Yeah. No, so it was actually related. It was a few different things. It was related to engineering, but part of it was, during the pandemic, we're like, okay, what can we do that's interesting? And that, I have a network of a lot of leaders around town, but around the US that I've worked with, or even beyond the US. It's like, can we just have some interesting conversations about topics that are relevant right now? And it was kind of to tie it to things that we were doing, as engineering at the time. But, right around last summer, it was a lot about diversity in hiring, and the challenges we were facing hiring, but also diversity in general. We talked about things like compensation, which were important, about remote working, about hiring practices, talked about data and how, modern kind of data stacks and where that's moving. I talked about cannabis tech actually with a buddy of mine who was an early, kind of early foray into cannabis tech and what it was like to build in an industry that, in some ways could have taken advantage of a lot of technology out there, but because it was related to cannabis, you have technology providers that didn't want to work with them, right? And so it was just kind of like this, hey, what are some good, interesting conversations we can have and do during this time when we're all kind of sitting at home.
Oh yeah, I remember early on in the show, in the first 50 episodes or so, I had someone on. I think his name was Roger, and he was
Roger. Roger's my buddy, Roger Abando.
Oh, you know him? Yeah. Okay, so he did the. We were talking about that because he did the payments. It was a POS system, right?
Yeah, Baker Technologies.
Yeah.
So Roger and I went to college together, and we were a year apart. We were good friends.
Oh, dude, that's crazy. You know what's even weirder is I type notes while we talk so I don't forget things. Mm-hmm. And I was typing a note. I was like, as you were talking, I was like, oh, that's right. With the Tesh on tap, Meetesh does like a really good job with personal branding. Is that like his PR or, what is that? Because every time I meet people that are awesome, they also know you. And so it's like,
I really appreciate that. And, it's funny because we could go, tongue in cheek, and my wife tells me I'll talk to anyone. Right. But to some extent it's true because I genuinely enjoy people, right? Like it's not facetious. It's not a facade. Like I do, like I minored in psychology, there's parts of anthropology that are fascinating to me. I just genuinely enjoy people. And I'm curious and interested in people and their stories and what they do. And so I do meet a lot of people and I talk to them, but for me, it's not a chore, right? For me, I don't look at, networking or this as like something I have to do. It's just part of naturally what I do because I like it. And so, I've built up the connections with people throughout my, career and life and try to keep some of it up just because I'm curious and interested in what they're doing, that, I feel like I can learn a lot from them, share what I have. And so like it is kind of random how like just know a lot of people, but it's, it's kind of gone well that way for me, I guess.
Yeah. It's like you are just a good person. You go around, you talk to a lot of people, build relationships, and then opportunities emerge versus like, let's say you sit down and you put an hour in your calendar a week to intentionally do this, right?
Right.
Did I get that
yeah,
right?
Exactly. Yeah. Cool. I never did that. But thankfully, I don't think I think different people need different approaches, right? Like based on what comes naturally. That I never felt the need to do that because, to your point, I just kind of was myself and took what came opportunistically. And thankfully that helped me.
Yeah. Dude, I want to talk about Andela. Can we talk about Andela?
Let's talk about Andela.
So you were the first time that I heard. I wonder if we can even dig up that old episode. But
oh yeah,
when I first talked to you a few years ago, you introduced me to Andela, and like I went and looked them up, and then from there, I heard more people using it, and then I went and talked with them and like went through their whole onboarding process and everything like that to hire some engineers. And I've just heard like really awesome things. What is your relationship like with Andela?
Yeah, so we started with Andela back in 2016. So now 5.5 years ago, when they were pretty early on, and we were still early and needed to grow our team pretty quickly. And one of the things that we hit was a sweet spot of good people, on the Andela side, and then good people like in Nigeria and at the time in Kenya too on our team, who were just looking for a great opportunity. And it was almost kind of this perfect mix of timing and talent and everything. I kind of likened it to what India was like back in the late 90s, early 2000s, before a lot of competition came in, is that there was a ton of great talent available. There wasn't a lot of like competition yet. And, it was this perfect timing. And we got some phenomenal people. We still have, I believe, 14 team members, working with us, and some of whom have been with us this whole time. And there was a lot that they just brought a natural passion to it, right? Where, in the industry, what we were seeing was there was a little bit, I guess I hope not offend anyone, but there's a little bit of entitlement. There was a little bit of like, there was certainly this feeling of, if I'm an engineer, I have my choice of jobs. I can demand all this and that. Whereas you looked at these folks where it's like, I have an opportunity to do something bigger, to learn, to not only learn and grow myself, but learn and then take it back and invest in my local community, right? And so the passion and the motivation and this desire was like different. It was different than what it was here, and it was infectious, right? It actually grew the entire team, and so we had a phenomenal experience in terms of bringing in, this talent. We integrated them right into our teams. As part of our teams, we adjusted schedules as we could. We, would fly over there once a year, fly the team out once a year. We're investing in, video technology, kind of remote technologies from way back, and found some great talent, actually.
That's exciting, man. When they were telling me when I went through the process, they were saying, oh yeah, like they integrate with your team and your culture, and like you'll bring them to the States, or you'll go over there. And I just thought it was a really interesting model. I'm not sure how much it's changed. Like, I know they've done some change to their model. Are you still keeping up with that?
I've kept up with it some. I've gotten a little further away, but they have changed a lot, right? Like, a number of things that have led to it, which is, more competition, more, scale in terms of needing to bring in more developers to serve more companies. So they've expanded countries and geographies. The natures of the pandemic. They had, originally kind of centers where they, got big offices, served lunches, provided a lot of support and coaching, but it was all about bringing people in to a certain place where, during the pandemic, that couldn't happen. And so now they went, to my knowledge, completely distributed, right? And so I've invested in the technology to support and, helping people with their laptops and internet, all that stuff. But there's no longer this kind of, bring everyone into a certain place. And so, prior to the pandemic, we had this notion of almost having two offices, right? Which was, we had our Austin office and we had our Lagos, Nigeria office. And even in the office in Lagos, there was kind of like a bullpen area where our entire team there sat together. So it really did feel like two offices, not like Austin and a bunch of people, And so that's shifted some, which has also, I think, made it different for new team members joining on, right? Like the ones that experience that retain a lot of that collaboration, cohesiveness kind of innately, versus the ones that, people that are coming on after that. And so I think a lot of that has changed in terms of, if we were to start with Andela today versus back then, I think the experience would be different, right? I still firmly believe that what's kept the 14, people, why we've had such success, is that it really does come down to people, right? And their original mission of, kind of brilliance or talent is distributed and opportunity isn't. I completely agree with, which is that, to me, it's not about Nigeria, Africa, China, India, Pakistan, Europe, South America. It's not about like, is it this company or that company? It really is about the people, right? And there are great people everywhere. And it's just a matter of that opportunity, about connecting them. And then, you can do it. It really just boils all down to the people.
I love it. Yeah, you're right. You can find great people pretty much anywhere. That's one of the interesting things when I started to travel internationally was how similar all like humans are. There's definitely like some little things like, we got some different food. There's some, different ways that we go about our day, but 80+% of it is like, we're the same.
Right. Exactly. And, it's funny because you go to other cultures, or you watch, I watch, a lot of travel shows or food shows, and you're like, you see people in other cultures and you're like, you know what? Everyone has their own, like, I know someone like that, but over here. Right. And like, I know there's just commonisms where you're like, we are all people, we are all humans, and, and have the same basic needs, desires, drives, and just have different traditions and customs and food and backgrounds.
Yeah. And work ethics too. I got to be honest with you. Different cultures have different work ethics.
I completely agree. And, I think a lot of it just comes down to that's your culture, but also what you faced in terms of growing up, and like what challenges you faced, what obstacles you had to overcome. I think, in my mind, drives a lot of your work ethic too.
Oh, for sure. I watched this whole documentary on like Japan being so advanced and being such workaholics to the point where they have a word in their language for when you die working at your desk.
I've heard of this. I can't remember what it's called,
yeah.
but I read something about that.
Yeah, I always butcher it or forget it, but yeah, when I read that, I was like, oh, that's interesting. Why? And it was apparently because like after the like Hiroshima, I think is what it was. They worked so fervently to rebuild that, and then that never stopped. Like that energy and that spirit didn't just stop after they had rebuilt back from the destruction. It just kept going and it launched them. I mean, if you think about it, like we hear a lot about, you hear a lot about Japan and their technology, but like if you look at them on a map, like they're fairly small for how much we hear about them.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's a great example of the reputation they've built and the positive reputation they've built and what's come out of the hard work there.
Yeah, dude, that's exciting. Have you been to Japan?
I have not. It's still on my list. I've made it to Hong Kong. I've been to India a ton of times, but I still want to go to a lot of Southeast Asia and East Asia there.
I know. I'm hoping no, I haven't. No, one of my friends is he's from Russia, and for a while he did like videography around the world. Like he would just go to these different destinations with companies to film. And he was telling me, I was like, of all the places you've been, he's been to like 50 plus countries. He's like, where's the one place I have to see? And he was like, Japan. And I was like, why? And he said the technology there is so advanced and so common, it's just mind boggling. I was like, oh, that's cool.
I've heard great things about it. It's funny. We've been watching this show on Netflix. Slight digression, but it's called Somebody Feed Phil, which is by Phil Rosenthal, who was the guy who created Everyone Loves Raymond. And so it's ostensibly a food show where he goes around to different places and eats different food. But some in fancy restaurants, some with chefs, some in dives. But it's also a travel and culture show, which it is phenomenal, and it's endearing, and it's cute, and it's funny, and it's like educational, and it's a great show we watch with the kids. But I've learned so much about different places, in Asia and Europe and everything from watching this, and it just reminds me of what you brought up of like there's so many surprising things that you're like, whoa, I never knew that. Wow, that's awesome, right? Like I can't believe they do that. That it's like makes me want to go visit all these places.
Yeah, we're always looking for good content to watch with the kids. Ours are younger, they're like age 4 and 2. How old are yours?
Mine is almost 14 and 11 and a half. So
okay, so you gotta you gotta keep them engaged.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and they love to travel, so and so they're now like, well, we got to go here. I want to go try this place. I want to go to that. Or like keeping a list of all the places that at some point we're going to have to go.
Yeah, tell them make a list. They'll keep it cheaper.
Exactly.
Oh man. So I do have a question for you about this.
Yeah.
I saw it and I was like, I don't know if we should have him on the show. But it said your role is CTO/CDO. What's with that?
It is. So CDO in this case, Chief Data Officer, not digital. And so if we rewind way back, one of the areas of technology that has been a thread throughout my entire career has been data. I actually started dabbling and I wrote a backprop neural network in like 1992 or 93. Because I was fascinated with AI at the time and the brain and how it worked. And then throughout my early career, I started working on databases, getting deep into like query optimization for SQL Server, for Oracle, for DB2, Postgres when it first came out, and started working with ETL pipelines and Talend and cubes way back before the term big data really was around. And so a lot of kind of the underpinnings of data, engineering, data architecture, warehousing, a lot of this stuff was really just kind of part of what I did and part of one of my areas of expertise. And so, coming into the Zebra, I knew that data was going to be critical, right? We're going to have access to competitive data. We're going to be consumer scale. It was going to be a big part of who we were, both for how we make decisions, but also how we serve consumers better and carriers better. And so I just kind of ran a lot of our data strategy in terms of us. We built our own, event pipeline, our warehouse, our BI tools, and it was all part of engineering. What happened, as we grew is that, that was part of engineering, and then data science became part of engineering. But our analysts were completely distributed. They were hired by the teams. We didn't have any governance or data stewardship. We didn't have any kind of cohesive leadership and kind of strategy or vision around it. And early last year, we realized in order to truly realize the potential of the data and get it, we needed to kind of centralize it, and it needed to be from the leadership level all the way down. And so in looking at it, in terms of who had the most experience, I clearly have loved data. We said that this is very heavily and closely tied to technology, but it's not the same as engineering. And so we created a sister org out of that, which is focused on data and has all those roles: data engineering, analytics engineering, analysts, has data science, it has data stewards and governance, and really focused on our entire data solution. And working with the rest of the company too. And so that's, really when I kind of took on both roles of chief technology officer and chief data officer.
Do you get 2 paychecks?
I wish. That'd be fantastic.
We should talk to somebody about that.
Yeah. I'm going to take a note here. I'm going to go, back to our CTO. Our CEO. I was like, hey, you know what? I think maybe it's time for multiple paychecks here.
Yeah. Just tell him I said so. No, I'm kidding. He'll be like, I don't care. So I'm curious though, like, first of all, I didn't know that about you. So that's awesome. But I'm curious about how that plays out, like functionally day to day. So I'm just going to ask a couple weird questions maybe. And so you've got this data team, they're in charge of data. Like how did they get to do their job? But over here in engineering, we're adding a new feature and I need to add a new column right to the database. How do they work together or separate responsibilities?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. And so I guess it comes down to the separation is not on the like database layer for runtime, right? So the product engineering teams they maintain their own data and their databases and runtime stuff. But the translation or the difference really comes down into schemas and events, right? And so the layer is really around, we want to track, much like you might do with Google Analytics or with a segment or whatever, like events around what happened, what a user did, what we learned about a user, what transactions, cost information. And we have, we built a support for schemas and schema validation. And so, they really kind of collaborate on what these schemas are, release them, and then it's up to the product engineering teams to fire those events that then go into our data pipelines, get pulled in, and then the data team takes over in terms of aggregating it, modeling it to make it available for data science, for analytics, for business intelligence, and then in our BI tools as well, right? And so that kind of event pipeline and the data there is really that the separation or the line or the interface there. And so it's less of the, I own the database versus this, but more around our data warehouse and events and that stuff, that the separation happens.
Yeah, that makes sense. I found Segment a few years ago, and when I did, I was like, ooh, this is really, really interesting.
Yeah, we looked at it and then we were like, they do a lot of great things. And at the time we were also like, I don't think we can afford them. And this is important for us. So let's go, let's go build what we need.
Oh yeah. They were the first, like my experience was they were how I learned about that type of model, because now there's hundreds of companies that do it. Right. But I had never seen it before. And when I first saw it with Segment, I was like, this is so neat. And you're right. Mm-hmm. It wasn't cheap.
Yeah. Well, and there's so much that we can do off of it in the future too. That's not just analytics. And where we're moving to is you can do a whole lot of real-time decisioning. You can build models to support runtime data science, like personalization and things like that, where through that event pipeline we can understand, is this the first time someone's come to the site? Have they been there before? Did they get stuck somewhere? Can we provide personalized education or messaging around that? Do we, based on what we know about a consumer, can we give them specific options? right? Can we show them more or less information based on, what we have learned or know about them? But a lot of that time, like, you need that information instantly, right? You need to understand what happened before. And so, getting these events, processing them, building that architecture to support that, that's one of the most interesting, things we have kind of going on right now.
Yeah, it sounds like the data department, for lack of a better term, they seem to interface with the entire organization, because that would be, I would have to be talking to marketing if I'm going to be changing stuff on the site, and like copy and things like that. How do ideas like bubble up and propagate? Like how do they come about?
You mean,
like, let's say,
like
I'll give you an example.
Yeah.
You just rattled off, okay, based off of them coming to the site, we could show them different content, right? Like, the problem that I have found with the data science and all of that is there's an infinite amount of things you can do. It's like super hard. So like, I guess to form a better question is, how do things come up, and then or how do you choose what to focus on?
That's a great question, because we've seen that challenge too, and is actually, going back to what we started talking about. One of the things we're looking to address with this transformation is, we've started to, we still have our data science team as a team, but we've also now, as we've aligned to OKRs and objectives, we've embedded data scientists with some of the product development teams. And they're focused not on initiatives, but on achieving certain objectives and key results. And then, that's where the team now and what they, they're like, all the smart people we've hired get to help figure out of what are some ideas and how best might we go solve those things, right? Like, how might we hit this target? How might we better serve our customers? And that's where I think we elevate or provide the opportunity for our data scientists to say, hey, we might be able to do this, or, here are some ideas of, how we might personalize or, work through that. Whereas it's not, sometimes it can be so distant or separated, to your point, that it's hard to make progress or get that, right at the forefront of product development.
What is data mesh?
So data mesh, it's one of my favorite topics in data right now. And I guess you look at it, where data has come, right? As a modern organization, you've kind of gotten to where you're like, okay, we have all these roles, this, like, what we understand a lot more about it, but it's been centralized, right? Centralized is great in terms of consistency, standards, knowledge share, knowledge, et cetera, but it doesn't scale well. And we're facing a similar problem to what engineering faced when, microservices came out and domain-driven design and all this stuff is, we have a monolith in some ways. And how do you scale? And, and data mesh is akin to that problem, what, microservices and, domain-driven design was, which is how do we provide, like, build the plumbing, build the infrastructure and the pieces that require a lot of data specific knowledge centrally, but then empower and enable teams that know their domains to own the data for their domains and then piece it together in a mesh, right? And so that's really what this, this concept is about. And it, it's pretty new and in terms of figuring out in practice what works and what doesn't, what are the things we can take from engineering, what are the things that don't work the same way, but really about how do you scale modern data orgs.
That's pretty neat. I like that. Meetesh Mesh.
Meetesh Mesh. Mesh Tesh. There you go.
Mesh Tesh. There we go. That's much better. All right. What other topics did we want to get to today? Did you have anything else on your mind?
No, I mean, I think the other one that kind of ties again, and this is both because of my position as CTO and CDO, is like what parallels and differences are there between site, like SREs, infrastructure, site, like DevOps, site reliability, engineering, and kind of support on the engineering side, and data. Because, if you look at it on, the engineering side, there's been a lot of progress in terms of things, on site reliability engineering, like defining SLOs and SLIs, right? And monitoring observability, providing, there's tools around PagerDuty, around like understanding how the health of your services, being able to direct that to the right teams to diagnose, things around being able to have kind of push button deploys and rollbacks with containers and, Kubernetes and a lot of this stuff. So there's been a lot of advancement there that has helped solve this issue of something breaks. What broke? How do we know that it broke before the consumer, the customer does? How do we get the right people online? How do you fix it quickly? How do you diagnose it? All that kind of stuff. But then you have similar problems in data, but it's not as far advanced in terms of how you handle it, which is to some extent, it's a similar problem, but it's a lot harder to know if your data is broken, right? In some cases, if the data doesn't show up at all, okay, you can say it's broken, right? But what if it's off by a percent? Is that within acceptable thresholds? 2%? What if it's a trend, right? How do you say when the trend is off versus not? What if it's just that, you typically had, only 70% of your data was non-null, and now it's 65%. Is that an indicator of a potential problem or not? Right. And so like determining if something is right or wrong is a lot harder. And then because we haven't yet gotten to a data mesh or something more distributed, you have this monolith. So understanding, like rolling back or figuring out how to address it is harder too. And so I guess there's a lot of still open questions in my mind of how do we solve some of the same problems that were solved in engineering, but with data, which is a slightly different beast. And how much can we borrow, and versus how much is just not applicable?
Yeah, I'm curious. We always like to ask leadership questions at the end of the show. So yeah. I've got one for you. Your company's growing. You've got a lot of people. You've got new people coming in. You've got existing people. It sounds like, based off of knowing you, that you guys have pretty motivated, driven culture over there. What stands out to you about like the next generation of leaders? Like what's things that they're doing that stand out to you where you're like, I want to give that person more opportunity? How can I stand out to Meetesh?
That's a great question. And I think the biggest thing for me is retaining that sense of ownership or drive that maybe was kind of more prevalent or easier when we were smaller, but in a larger organization, which is, one of the things that I kind of look at as a leader is, I guess, and maybe stereotypically, the bigger we get, the easier it is to fall into patterns and ruts and get stale. And like, we can't, like, I don't want to be that org, and we won't get to where we need to be as a company if that happens. And so what really kind of strikes me is people who maintain that spirit of, I see a problem, I'm going to go fix it, or I'm going to figure out how to fix it. And that drive and that ownership from everywhere, not just from leaders, but from, individual contributors all the way through to leaders, I think is what really, really sticks out, because we need those people. That's what we built the company on. And that's what is going to get us forward, is that mindset that I'm not okay with things that are broken just because, but I want to go try and fix them. Right. And so those are the people that we, like to elevate and bring up, is the people that aren't scared of that.
So you just bake that into your culture. So at each level, leaders are looking for that.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, that's one of the things people have asked me, who ends up doing well at the Zebra? And I was like, I talk about people who take that kind of ownership. We're not a micromanaging culture. We don't want to be a micromanaging culture. We want people who crave the responsibility and the accountability and want to go, grow and learn from it. I came from a I worked at Trilogy Software back in the day, which was really about, we high growth and high learning, but we got thrown to the fire, right? And it was scary at times, but we were given protection, right? We were given that air cover to make mistakes and learn from them. And that's how we were able to move quickly, how we were able to grow quickly and learn quickly. And I truly believe that. I've told my teams that no one is ever going to get in trouble for an honest mistake, right? That's how we learn. It's how we move fast. What we need to do from them is not make the same mistake. We need to learn and grow, right? And not be negligent or lazy, but make honest mistakes, right? That's how we go fast. That's how we move forward, as opposed to kind of, treading lightly and being scared to go and take some risks.
Well said, my friend. Was that Trilogy the education software company?
No, it's Trilogy, the enterprise software company.
Okay.
That you can look up some good, interesting Forbes articles about back in the day that kind of seeded a lot of tech in Austin.